Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much to IAFOR and the organizer, and especially you, Joseph, for having UNESCO once again. Former Director General Federico Mayor, who unfortunately, as you maybe know, passed away this year, was last year with you, I suppose, connected. And it's a great honor, great pleasure for me to play this role, let's say, in this special address today. Well, as a university professor myself, I like recovery. This dimension maybe is kind of. I feel very much at home here at the Sorbonne, and let me say that in these times of uncertainty, our work, your work, as researchers, as students, as professors, is more than ever important and crucial in the global landscape. I'm sure that we are all acutely aware of the many challenges we're facing today. The, conventional challenges, let me say, like climate change, like disruptive technology coming out and dramatically reshaping the way we work, where we live, where we learn, coming later on this point a little bit. But maybe most importantly, a new geopolitical landscape is kind of surrounded us. And I think that it's important that we focus a little bit on that. That's why I propose a few thoughts, reflections on the role of education, especially higher education, in these troubled times, and some thoughts, food for thought for the future. Like all of you, UNESCO believes that overcoming these challenges becomes and begins with education, which is the foundation of peace and sustainable development. Education in our humanistic vision empowers individuals, equalizes societies, and lays the groundwork for shared prosperity. It's both an individual and societal investment, giving dignity, cultivating truth and understanding. It also saves lives, improving vaccination rates, reducing child mortality, promoting better sanitation and treatment. I mean, we have a lot of data that can demonstrate the role of education on all of this. However, today, still 251 million children and youth are out of school. 700 million adults are still illiterate. 2/3 are women. And we do believe that it's not absolutely 70%, by the way, of those who are in schools are not able to age 10 to read and understand a very simple test. So there is something wrong. There is something that we have to face as an obstacle for equity, inclusion, and let's say building a better society. This is why UNESCO continue to advocate for increased investment in education, which is not absolutely obvious now, backed by evidence produced by academic research. And this brings me naturally to my first point, which is the role of higher education and research, and particularly the role of universities within our broader knowledge-based ecosystems. We know that universities are where ideas are tested, where values are debated, and where futures are kind of imagined and shaped. Throughout history, there have been spaces for free inquiry, critical thinking, freedom of speech, public debate, standing, let's say, as bridges between the past and the future. And this mandate has been developed around 4 fundamental principles that are still the mission of higher education across cultures and generations. They resonate a little bit with the eyes of International Academic Forum, not by chance, I suppose. Interdisciplinarity, internationalism, interdependence, and innovation. These are the 3 components of what we can say universities are about through the history, and it's part of their DNA. And let me elaborate a little bit on these 4 components and see how they can bring new breath and new contribution to position the role of higher education in these current times. First, interdisciplinarity. From the 5th century in ancient India, as a scholar and the classical philologist in my career, had the pleasure and the honor to learn ancient languages like Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit. And Sanskrit, as you maybe know, the perfect language, was very much the root for building the very first center for sharing ideas and bringing this interdisciplinary approach in that part of the world. At the same time, in the 19th century, as we all know, in Fes, the very first university was built by a woman, Fatima, putting together different branches of work and wisdom, medicine, philosophy, and theology. Today, this principle, of course, lives in interdisciplinary research centers, academic programs that prepare students for complexity. And that's why I think it's so important that we save this approach and we protect this approach from those who question very much about it. And that's why internationalism, which has been part of the DNA of university from the start, is so important today. And this is my second point. Learning has always long transcended borders. It's not new, of course. We are in Paris, and Sorbonne brought together scholars from across Europe in the 14th century. International students in my own university city, Perugia in Italy, was the very first to grant legal protections. So long before Erasmus program, we can say that global conventions, academic mobility was already a very much lived reality, which is not exactly what we see now in our 21st century. And this is, I think, a point that we have to put at the very center of debate like this forum. I hope you are going to address through the REACH program you presented this point. The third unique quality has been independence. And let me stress very much this point. The freedom to ask difficult questions, to challenge received wisdom, and to pursue knowledge wherever it leads is the very much function of academic space. In ancient Greek, the concept of paresia, which is I can speak freely about whatever the topic is, was a foundation for intellectual life that shaped the university as a space of public reasoning and critical engagement. And over time, these values fostered innovation, the fourth I in the list of UNESCO principles. In 1905, when Einstein published his theory of relativity, fewer than 1,000 scientific papers, as you know, were published globally. Today, universities produce over 2 million annually, advancing every facet of life, from vaccination research to clean energy. Well, as we all know, higher education today is more important than ever for all of this, and it's also under more pressure than ever. In just 2 decades, global higher education enrollment more than doubled, from around 100 million at the turn of the century to over 250 million today. Yet, disparities remain clearly, from access for refugees who represent only 7% of the world population enrolled at university level, and with a huge gap between the global south and the western and the north of the world. The average ratio of enrollment in higher education is around 47% of the aged population, while African countries are still around 10%, and the rest of Europe and North America and the Western world reach out to 75%. So these are data that are very much part of a landscape that must be crucially now, let's say, reshaped, rethought, and readdressed in a different way. At UNESCO, we work on this side. We aim to transform higher education to be more open, inclusive, and flexible, and to shift from an ethos of competition to a culture of cooperation. Still, principles that seem to be obvious, but let me say very honestly and clearly, seem not to be so popular today. Through networks like 1,000 chairs of UNESCO in 125 countries, by the way, a wonderful program launched by Federico Mayor in 1996, we promote interdisciplinary research and global exchange. And we also provide the international community with concrete tools like the Global Convention for the Recognition of Qualification and Competencies that becomes now, it entered into force last year, and having 38 countries ratified this convention, let's say a concrete tool to facilitate mobility, to make university even more international at global level than they were before, and most importantly, to make access and inclusion the key words when it comes to international programs. We are also exploring academic freedom through the revision of the 1997 recommendation on the status of higher education teaching personnel. That it's an important dimension of our normative work. And of course, championing open science as an important principle and an important, let's say, dimension to strengthen is another important part of our work. Well, this theme raises fundamental, even philosophical questions about the purpose of education in this changing world. And I do think that as the COVID pandemic clearly demonstrates, I'm sure you remember all when, all the education system shut down and 1.6 billion children and youth were out of school and out of universities. By the way, it was my team to collect this data and provide this data the international community with. We understood that being at school, attending lectures at university is not simply a question of knowledge transmission. It's very much a question of social inclusion. It's very much a question of, let's say, having learning environments and not simply as places to learn, but also, most importantly, places to socialize and to unlock the potential of children and youth. And we are reminded that learning depends not just on access to devices or information. Technology was replacing more or less the physical approach to education, but very much meaningful human relationships must be the ground for everything we are doing in education. And I do believe that another I should be included in your list, possibly, as well as in our list. And the I is about imagination. Imagination is maybe the only function where no generative AI, no machine learning can really hacker the faculty that as human beings we have through language and through social relationship. We can, imagine the future. By 2024, we have now a new ecosystem for learning, as a new ecosystem for work and, of course, living, which is very much restructured by an emerging disruptive technology with generative AI. And this new reality compels us to reflect carefully around a few questions that I wish to to put on the table for your possibly further discussion in this forum. First of all, how can education shape the development of AI and make technology enhances rather than diminishes human capacities? What competencies do learners, teachers, and the citizens need to thrive in this rapidly evolving digital landscape? And how can public and private sectors cooperate effectively to ensure AI innovation advances educational goals and the public interest? They are not obvious questions. I think that there is a lot of, let's say, work to do, and there is a lot of fundamental debate to have. At UNESCO, we believe the answer lies in clear, simple principles, robust policy frameworks, and practical competencies. Our approach is guided by the concept of inclusion, equity, quality, and accessibility. Once again, they are not obvious principles put in practice whenever it's about implementing technology in our learning systems. When it comes to education in the digital society, solidarity and co-creation remain our two key values. Solidarity is critical. Why? Solidarity is critical because half of the world, as you know, remain digitally excluded. An inclusive approach can bridge this gap and even help disadvantaged regions leapfrog toward equity. Traveling a lot, especially in the global south, I can say that we cannot expect that generation of young people, Africa, as you know, is going to double the number of young people in the next 30 years or even before that, to wait for, let's say, an incremental process of advancement and improvement of the quality of learning and access to learning as this part of the world actually did through decades and even centuries. So technology can really be the game changer, including AI, if and only if it will be driven in terms of implementation by the four principles I just mentioned. Co-creation is equally important. Today, private companies, as we know, dominate AI innovation and production, with fewer than 1% of AI doctoral graduates entering public service roles. These are data that we just collected last year. And this, of course, is raising concerns about whose interest this technology ultimately serves. Well, yet this imbalance can be corrected through public-private partnerships rooted in shared responsibility, mutual accountability, and ethical transparency. You kindly mentioned the Global Education Coalition. Just a few words on this mechanism that we put in place when COVID pandemic rapidly and dramatically changed our lives. Is still a very well-working mechanism where the private sector, from Microsoft, Google, Huawei, the big high-tech companies come together with the governments and UN system in order to ensure that when it comes to implement our programs, those principles I mentioned, and especially ethics, is the very core of this process. Well, translating these values into action requires clear guidance for education systems. To this end, we develop very simple tools, AI competence frameworks. As I mentioned before, it's about the skills, it's about being prepared, it's about having a global citizenship, as you mentioned in your program, which is now digital and green by definition. Necessarily, these two components must be included in our programs and approach. And this approach emphasizes, once again, a very simple dimensions, a human-centered mindset, empowering, not replacing human agency, understanding AI ethics, bias, transparency, privacy, fairness. Finally, practical skills in AI. It's about how to use, it's about its being designed, it's about fostering engagement and creativity. Well, we have countries already working on this set of principles and components, from Finland to Jordan and Turkey, just to mention very many different regions of the world that have already integrated these competencies into national education policies. And this is a good sign. It's a kind of encouraging sign for us. Well, achieving this vision requires investing not only in AI, but investing in people, investing in human capital, investing in teachers, investing in students, investing in researchers in this space for sure, and public research. Education, to conclude, must steer, not just react to digital transformation, and higher education must steer and drive a process of reshaping the way we live as citizens and not be driven and somehow so deeply influenced by external forces. So let me conclude by saying that Federico Mayor, I'm sure, last year, I had an excellent relationship with him. We met once in Madrid 2 years ago now. I was still very much, engaged in his Foundation for Peace. And I remember a few words in that nice conversation we had. He wanted to share with me, telling me that whatever we do at UNESCO, the think tank of the UN system, build in the aftermath of the Second World in order to rebuild society through very simple pillars: education, science, and culture, in order to be the guarantee for peace in the next decades. Well, whatever we do at UNESCO is very much driven by a very simple principle, which is the principle of investing in knowledge, in people, what we call today the soft power, which for this century may be, while governments are deeply concerned by defense and security, and forget a little bit that the best way to reach out to stability, peace, and security is investing in a new dimension of global citizenship. And that's the mission we have, and that's the mandate we continue in a very tireless and engaged way to pursue, malgré tout, as they say in French, malgré tout, I mean, in a context where these principles that were the foundation of the UN system, the foundation of UNESCO as the house of peace within the UN system, seem not to be so obvious today. I thank you very much, and I wish to cooperate even further.